Nighttime on Still Waters. This is NB 506812, narrowcasting into the night from somewhere on Britain's waterways. June 6th, Friday. We walk through the sheep field as the rain pours down. My boot socks still wet from last night. The rooks muster noisily at the one oak. Even the magpies' cackles cannot wake the lamb still asleep, nestled beneath the blackthorn hedge. The world outside drips and sparkles. The rain may have stopped, for a while at least, but teardrop rings continue to form in the water under the canal-side alders and oaks, and the broad sword leaves of the yellow flag glow silver in the darkness. And this is the narrowboat Erica, narrowcasting into the dripping dark of an early summer night, to you, wherever you are. It's so lovely to see you. Thank you so much for coming. Come inside before the rain starts again. The kettle's just boiled, the cabin is snug and dry, and there is a seat waiting especially for you. So take off your wet coat, make yourself comfortable, and welcome aboard. The skyways are busy right now, particularly during that period when things normally settle down after sunrise or just before roosting. Here, the rooks are clustering around the one oak, along the telegraph wire that runs alongside the railway line. The young are mostly fully fledged by now, and joining the family on their forays among the fields and meadows. And their rook gatherings are growing bigger, families merging. That annual transition from family to community. Although those ties and bonds still remain, and this year's young will remain with the family for at least a year. But the units are becoming less visible, less distinct to the casual observer. Looking across the field, all you see are busy bodies, striding and strutting, fishing the land as the heron fishes the water. Every now and again, they lift off en masse in a whirling vortex of wing and sky-clamouring calls. But right now, they've yet to settle down and become earthbound. They have taken off from the roosts and the much-repaired nests and joined the dawn muster that sets the first light a-boil in its joyous tumult and cacophony. First a small group, circling, calling out to the sleepy skyline on ragged wings, and slowly they cluster. North, south, east and west they come. Then, on some sign, they wheel off together, although there are usually one or two stragglers, or perhaps rooks of independent mind and character. And the group flies off on their dawn patrol of their territory. It happens in reverse at dusk. Autumn and spring are the best times to see this. But today, the patrols are done. The fishing fields have been selected, and now it's time to stop before the day's work begins, to pass on news of the night, to sort out the politics that emerges in any community. Who's sitting where, next to whom? Squabbles, chatter. but most sit and watch the sun's progress up the great wall of sky, and the shadows on the fields shorten. This is the rookery coffee break, the water cooler moment. Today, as is often the case, the One Oak is the local coffee shop. Familiar, convenient, and always happy to welcome you. And this week they've had to introduce their young to rain. After a very long spell of warm, dry weather, this week the spell has truly been broken. Mostly it's been the best of rain, as far as the land is concerned. Gentle, refreshing, replenishing rain. Although it's only in the last couple of days that the towpath beneath the mature oaks and ash have actually got damp, despite there having been one or two relatively heavy showers. And in a lot of places, the fields and the paths still haven't lost their deeply fissured worrit lines yet. However, the other evening, the rain came down so heavily, hammering and battering on the cabin roof and thrashing the surface of the canal into white fury. It sounded just like someone was throwing gravel at the cratch cover that's at the bow of the Erica. And it came down so hard that the runnels each side of the cabin roof were overwhelmed, and the rain started to pour down under the stern canopy and onto the stern deck. There are ridges on the roof that should direct the water down toward the drainage points, but these are no way large or high enough to cope with really serious rain. This is something that has happened before, and so it's something we automatically keep an eye on in deluging showers. And a few well-placed tubs and pots solve the issue very easily and quickly. But I wonder just what those young rooks felt and experienced, sitting in their lofty homes among the glistening dark shimmer of wet leaf and branch. What did they make of it? This cascade of water from the sky, their playground, battlefield and home, that they're only just beginning to get to know. When it came, did they look to their parents? Did their parents look back? And did they find solace and shelter, a sanctuary in that familial contact, on that night when their skies turned to water? It's always lovely to hear from you, and I do appreciate you when you take the time and the trouble to get in contact with me. And so thank you to JB and mine Shambles over on Mastodon. Thank you, and I'm glad that you enjoyed the last episode. And it is always nerve-wracking reading someone else's writing, so I'm glad you were pleased with it, mine Shambles. And commenting on my reference in the last episode concerning the proper pronunciation of scone or scone, John McMahon on YouTube threw another option into the ring when he wrote, "Contemplate the pronunciation of the stone of scoon." Oh gosh, John, don't even go there. Let's just not go there. And talking of YouTube, hello also to Rebecca Cook. It's my pleasure, Rebecca. And talking of the last episode, Barry in the Fens contacted me to say that, like Dad, he too makes homemade wine, and that he had, on the go and bubbling away quite nicely now, 2 demijohns of strawberry from fresh shop-bought strawberries. And then he goes on and says, and like your dad, I make it far too strong. My wife prefers elderflower, again, made far too strong. And I have to say that wine and beer making was one of the things that we had to sadly give up when we moved onto the boat. We did contemplate it for a very short while, but there's just not enough room to stow all the bottles. However, I do miss that sight of a row of demijohns gently bubbling away. And I was also contacted by Adrian Good, another Good, and no relation as far as I know though. And he contacted me to say that he'd been enjoying the podcasts, and Adrian's connection with Life Afloat goes back to his days in the Merchant Navy. However, it doesn't stop there, because he also told me that he comes from a family of boat people who worked the boats, built the boats, and worked on the canals as lot keepers or so. And also, there's further connections with the podcast, where that Adrian also worked for a time in an aircraft factory, and that one of his friends moved to Toronto too, although that was in the 70s. And while on the subject of the episodes on Mum and Dad's move to Canada, I was bowled over earlier today by an email from another listener, Richard Griffin. And he told me about how he and his wife had been in a similar situation as us, in having to clear out their parents' houses and coming across lots of old documents and things, which, in his words, digging through parental clutter, we ended up developing an interest in genealogy along the way. And so subsequently he subscribed to a website that offers the opportunity to trawl through different archival material, and one of which includes passenger lists for sea voyages. And Richard sent me a photograph of the passenger list for the motor vessel Seven Seas, outbound to Quebec from Southampton on the 31st of March 1957. And on it are Mum and Dad's names and details. And what I find so particularly moving is that their names, unsurprisingly, have clearly been ticked off by hand, by pen. And that simple, apparently insignificant at the time touch makes this so much more human and personal than, for example, seeing a passenger list on a computer spreadsheet. I can just imagine Mum and Dad, excited, perhaps a little apprehensive, waiting as the official checked their details. And perhaps, knowing Mum and Dad, sharing a few words with them. And they would have seen that hand that made these little ticks, neat and precise compared to others on this list. And they would have smiled, reciprocated greetings, and moved on. And now here, after all this time, that small moment is once more acknowledged in that little mark. That's amazing, Richard. Thanks so much for sending it. And I really need to send a shout out to Steve Tyrrell. Hello, Steve. You're putting us all to shame with all the work that you're doing on Precious Jet. Steve, where do you get all your energy from? And I'm really glad that you're still enjoying the podcast. And also hello and thank you to Jason. And again, I'm glad you enjoyed the last episode too. Jason's name cropped up rather unexpectedly this week. I came across a notice about a new podcast on the canals, which looked really good, and was doing some, at the time, rather unsuccessful Googling to try and track it down, when I stumbled across a podcast information site that I've never seen before. I mean, these things are always springing up, like dandelions on a sunny April morning. And it mentioned Nighttime on Still Waters, so as it was new and the teaser synopsis was a little bit different to the usual just repetition of the website notes, I thought, I'll have a quick look at it. I'm really glad I did, because it was great. It was clearly one of those automated AI-driven things. And there was quite a bit that was very new to me, because there it confidently stated that Nighttime on Still Waters was an audio journal of life on the canals, and it went on to assert that its host was Erica, and its co-host is Jason Polite. Well, it must have scraped the audio, which I wasn't aware actually it could do, because Jason, they spelt your name Polite phonetically. So anyway, there you go, Jason. You can now podcast co-host to your CV too now. Unfortunately, I can't find the site again, so it's out there somewhere. And by the way, I did find that podcast that I was looking for, and it is really good. It's presented by an ex-BBC Radio 2 and Radio 5 Live newsreader, Adam Porter, so UK listeners might already know of him, or the name might be familiar. And it's called The Water Road. I think you'll really love it. It's a gentle 10 to 15 minute podcast that follows Adam and his husband's new life on board a narrowboat as they take us with them on their journey across Britain's waterways. Adam self-identifies as a radio man and so knows a thing or two about audio and presenting in an audio format, and it really shows in the episodes. It beautifully captures the feeling of journeying in a narrowboat along the canals and the waterways. I've put the link to it in the program notes below. I personally think that it is the best podcast on canals and narrowboating currently available. So please give it a listen if you're interested, and I'm sure you'll love it. And finally, of course, a really big thank you to all of our Lockwheelers for supporting this podcast. They are Susan Baker, Mind Shambles, Clare Hollingsworth, Kevin B., Fleur and David Mcloughlin, Lois Raphael, Tania Yorgey, Andrea Hansen, Chris Hinds, David Dirom, Chris and Alan on the narrowboat The Land of Green Ginger, Captain Arlo, Rebecca Russell, Allison on the narrowboat Mukka, Derek and Pauline on Silver Fox, Anna V., Orange Cookie, Mary Keane, Tony Rutherford, Arabella Holtzapfel, Rory with MJ and Kayla, the narrowboat Precious Jet, Linda Reynolds Birkins, Richard Noble, Carol Ferguson, Tracy Thomas, Mark and Tricia Stowe, and Madeline Smith. Thank you. Walpole, St Andrew, Walpole, St Peter, Terrington, St John, Tilney, St Lawrence, Tilney, All Saints, Fen Country, Kennington, St Clements. What kind of place is this? This flat landscape of cloud and water and earth and straight lines. A place where water, soil and light create a world of haunted, solitary emptiness. Scoured by drains and ditches, blistered by dikes. Trees are few, and those that are here are generally grouped in clumps to shield a lonely farmhouse from the brutal lashing of the North Sea wintering winds. And from their asymmetrical shapes and foliage, it's easy to identify the direction of the prevailing winds. Mountain and cliff-top trees in a place with no mountains and no cliffs. In January 2020, just before the pandemic hit, I wrote, Jan 2020, driving up to Norfolk through the brooding Fen Country. The heavy sky hung so low that it seemed to brush the tops of the rushes and the wind-blown reeds. The ploughed fields were bare, and long fingers of steel-coloured puddles pooled the rusty soil. And then a rook alighted by the side of the road, wings outstretched, toying with the raging air. Its feet touched the earth with such delicate precision. The landscape was so heavy it felt as if it would suck you in, mired forever in mud and iron-hard skies. But the rook brought lightness to the place, deftly lifting off from the cloying ground as we sped past, and in doing so it transformed the world. What is it about this place that reaches out to some deep part of you? For others have felt its tug on their heart and soul too. One of them is Edward's story. You walk the roof of the world here. Only the clouds are higher, and they are not permanent. Trees are too distant for the wind to reach, and mountains hide below the horizon. The wind labours through reed as though they were the final barrier. Houses and farms cling like crustaceans to the black hull of earth. Here you must walk with yourself, or share the spirits of forgotten ages. And there is something here that is soul deep in this airy land, eerie, some might call it, of flooding light and distant skylines. Although those of us who do not belong here, who have yet to feel the heartbeat of this special land, might feel overwhelmed in its strangeness. Roads, arrow straight, straighter than any Roman could make them, mirror the straightness of dike and spade-dug trenches and ditches. Walk the fields for any length, and it's not roads you will cross, but water, and lots of it. This rich, fertile land that was reclaimed from the sea. Miles away, the North Sea hungrily nibbles at the coastline, and this is a land whose dreams and memories are still washed with the eddies and dark currents of its older lives. And it's still here, in this marsh country, now tamed and diced. A fine threaded aquatic latticework grid of interconnected drainage and irrigation ditches. Where in the wolds and dales you'll find hedges, here the land is marked out as a hydrous patchwork counterpane of ditch and dike. A two-dimensional landscape of angles, sharp edges, bisecting lines, geometric arithmetic. Two-dimensional, flat, but not without depth or richness, and certainly not without character, or even a haunting charm. Villages, often mere hamlets of a few houses, dot and cluster along the drove roads like spring buds on a watery limb, crow-flight straight. Their names hold some kind of enchantment about them. Old poetry, old music half heard, worn smooth by the east wind and tired lips. Methwold Hythe, Fotheringhay, Hockwold cum Wilton, Cockley Clay, Wissington, Prickwillow, Westerly Waterless. And wind whipped and rain clawed, crows scalded and sun scorched, this is a land of far horizons. It's a land of no compromise and without pretension. There's an honesty about this place, and it's a place of no hiding. Stand here in the flatlands, under the great geese-haunted bell of greys and blues. It's easy to feel that this is a land that's been sculpted in a time before the Bible. Does that brooding sky and mirrored waters still wait? Wait to hear the soft pulse of the breath of God moving through the whispering reeds over the face of the deep? Standing among the great unbounded prairie-wide swaying oceans of wheat and barley and sugar beet, it's difficult not to detect that hushed sense of expectancy, even when the heavy tractors roar past on their outsized wheels, as if the land is still waiting, aware that in the periphery, the unordinary, the weird, the primordial still lurks. The strange lantern lights that glow in the distance, marsh gas, will-o'-the-wisps, lantern men. On these flatlands of the Fen Country, there is room enough for all these and more. Black dog, bogle, the malignant, the exiled. Perhaps that's why the church is so often not only at the centre of these scattered hamlets, but have also become subsumed into their very names. Wisbeach St. Mary, Tid St. Giles, Tid St. Mary, Walpole St. Andrew, Walpole St. Peter, Terrington St. John, Tilney St. Lawrence, Tilney All Saints, Terrington St. Clements, Wigan Hall St. Mary the Virgin, Wigan Hall St. Germans, Wigan Hall St. Peter, Wigan Hall St. Mary Magdalene, Ramsey St. Mary, St. John's End, Marshland St. James, Bradford St. George, Bradford St. Clare, names that ring like a litany. This land of churches, Luke Sherlock calls it, and he is right. Little sanctuary islands, strung like stepping stones across these mist-shrouded levels, with its hidden dykes and drainage ditches to catch and drown the unwary traveller. On clear days it would be possible, if you knew the lie of the land, to navigate your way across these long expanses just by spying church tower and steeple. Or could. In days gone by, these would have been the tallest buildings, towering beacons of reassurance and direction, geographical as much as spiritual. I can't be the only tourist lost in these fens to suddenly espy the great lantern of Ely Cathedral rise above the sea of fields and say, that's the way we need to be heading. However, alas, a number are now abandoned and derelict. The ribwork of rafters of their naves split and spread eagle to the sun and the winds and stars. Nature can also have something of the Viking about it. And now an older Pentecost rain falls upon the chancel and the derelict altar, and a wilder psalm is heard. Perhaps the reason why there is something about the fens that has such a powerful pull on me is that they seem to share so much in common with canals and their environment. Both fens and canals are very much liminal spaces, lands on the edge, intersectional, on the margins, part one thing, part another, and as a consequence they both suffer those same ambiguities, mistrusts, suspicions. For one thing, neither are natural. They are both entirely constructed landscapes. Fenland is older, yet nonetheless the signs and scarring of human hands are evident all around. And both are the result of incredible, almost miraculous feats of human invention and physical endeavour. Both involved immense and intrusive alterations to the land and ecologies. Both were achieved through pick, shovel, hard labour. And both entailed the land's relationship with water. One, the draining of vast tracts of East Anglian swampy wetlands and marshes. And the other, the laying down of large troughs to bring water to field and wood, moors and town. One, the digging down into the soil, the other, the raising up of dikes to hold back errant waters. Both involve the development of technologies to control and maintain water. These are both landscapes as much of water as they are of soil. And yes, while it is true that fens and canal systems are places of land and water, but they are even more so places of human ingenuity and accomplishment. These are created ecospheres made only possible by human hand. These places of wild are, in fact, entirely manufactured. However, they have now both lain long enough in our history and in our forgetting to feel almost natural. Although you cannot ignore the effects of human hands in these landscapes, the hard edges are becoming blurred. Nature flows back and heals the scars. And within the spoils of post-industrial heartlands, kingfisher and iris flash. And within the uncompromising flatlands of unhedged agriculture, orchid and harrier are found. They are both new, but also somehow immensely old. And within all this apparent bleakness and the bitten's mournful booming and the mud-soaked drabness, oh, there is beauty here too. And what is more, both landscapes breed a people born to see that beauty, where others may see just harshness and hardship. A people who have learnt to flow into their landscapes and to let themselves be moulded by it. Perhaps now, with the decline of the working boaters, more so the fens than the canals, however, there's still enough in it to hold true still to both. But also, people like these, who inhabit and are at ease within the liminal lands, the uncommon lands, can also be viewed with suspicion and even prejudice. They're different from us. They're not quite like us. And so the stories and the rumours grow up and take root about these people of the elements, those whose lives lean into the winds. And there's a strength and a dignity about these people of the fens, just as there was with those of the canals, a pride in who they are. Fen tigers is what the people of the fens call themselves, people carved from water and loam, different, rugged. Legend has it, according to Edward's story, that all true fenmen have black webbed feet. And a month or so ago, Mark Elvin, probably better known to listeners as Captain Bugwash, sent me a poem he had come across that he thought I might appreciate, and he was right. It's a poem by a Fenland man, Jeff Moore, and it's called The Worked Land. The fens, silent, slow, almost brooding. The earth stands still, but everything's moving. Rivers and dikes run through the land like deep blue veins. The wind cuts like a knife with a piercing pain. Rain falls, leaving flooded fields and farmers' sorrow, waiting for spring to bring the next furrow. As the earth turns, the fens stay in place, but the springtime brings an uptick in pace. Farms and fen tigers begin to stir. The frozen work of winter a forgotten blur. Fields spring to life as the fens drain away. Tractors come alive as seeds they spray. The earth is tilled, the soil is ready, preparing for a crop that is full and heavy. As spring turns to summer, the fens begin to glow, occasionally hidden by a savage fen blow. But the sun reappears as the dust fades, and fenmen only go home after long hours on the spade. The sun dries the land, and deep cracks appear. Farmers' water arcs through the air like a life-giving spear. As summer fades, barley and wheat sway. Farmers begin to harvest as all the toil is repaid. Autumn is here, as the harvest is done. A new season arrives, but more work has begun. Now the fen lies still, covered in mists. Summer harvest gone, but now sugar beet gifts. The work carries on as the winter draws near. The beet must be loaded before more rains appear. Slowly it seems the circle is done. Autumn crops depart with many hours done. Winter draws in slowly, but suddenly it's here. The circle complete, another fen year. And I'm really glad to hear that the campaign for the Fenland to have its own flag, to celebrate and be proud of its own identity is gaining momentum and support. And I've included a link to the campaign in the program notes below. But I'm going to leave the last word to Luke Sherlock, who you might know through his Instagram persona, English Pilgrim, or perhaps his inspiring independent bookshop in Frome, Sherlock and Pages. Again, links also in the program notes. Well, among Luke's other talents is his incredible gift for words, and his recent book, Forgotten Churches, published by Corto Publishing, has held me spellbound, not just by the beauty of the book itself, which is incredible, but by his writing. And I'm really grateful that Luke's given me permission to read the following extract from it, which I think sums up this enigmatic, almost unworldly character of the Fen Country. Luke Sherlock, Forgotten Churches. St. Peter, Wigan Hall, St. Peter, Norfolk. I left the train at Watlington and walked down Station Road to the gloomy, levied banks of the River Great Ouse. Once part of a vast, storm-absorbing wild stretching across some 1,500 square miles of Cambridgeshire, Norfolk and Lincolnshire, this part of the country is known as the Fens. The uncluttered hush, the enshrouding mists have for centuries, perhaps millennia, given way to a colourful cast of fenland characters. This is the land of the bog spirit Tidymon, where ghostly lantern men stalked the horizon, where flickering will-o'-the-wisps lured unsuspecting travellers into their watery fastness. Revered, cunning folk healed ailments and warded off evil spirits. It's a place I love to visit. Today, the fields have been drained, and the rivers long since hemmed in, contained. Still, the memories of those isolated pre-drainage marshland communities live on. Above that muddy, thick river and buffeted by marshland winds, I could see the open bones of St. Peter's before me. Red brick and stone, this church is now a romantic, ruthless ruin, having fallen into disrepair in the first half of the 20th century. Thankfully, the decline has now been halted, and the ivy slashed back, leaving a largely 15th century structure to be explored. I stopped in the nave and faced the wide, moody sky of East Anglia. There's something disconcerting about such a place being so recently ruined. A reminder that all things will pass eventually. After St. Peter's, I pushed onwards into this land of churches. Sky, earth, water, and megaliths of faith. What I was to later term the Wigan Hall Loop must be one of the best historic church walks in England. And still to be explored were Wigan Hall St. Germans, Wigan Hall St. Mary the Virgin, and, at the end of the walk, as the light faded, Wigan Hall St. Mary Magdalene. Here I grabbed my dinner from the little chippy on the corner of a suburban cul-de-sac and made my way back to the station. As the train pulled out on its way back to London, and a spit of rain hit the darkened windows, I felt almost relieved to be leaving the disconcerting clutches of marshland. But of course, I knew I'd be back. There is a wild and compelling underbelly to the seeming monotony of the fens. Oh, wonderful. And with that, this is the narrowboat Erica, signing off for the night and wishing you a very restful and peaceful night. Good night. Temperature outside 11.1 degrees. Inside 19 degrees. Humidity 95%. Dew point 10 degrees. Wind direction west-northwest. Wind strength 6 miles per hour. Barometric pressure 1006.8 rising. Cloud cover 81%. Cloud ceiling 29,400 feet. Precipitation 6.1 millimeters. Moon phase 89.5% waxing gibbous. Day length 16 hours 38 minutes. Sunset 21:25. Sky casting 4:47.